The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
On this week's show, we welcome back United States Congressman Dan Meuser of the 9th Congressional District. After his schooling, which included New York Maritime University, where he received a Navy ROTC scholarship, Dan joined a small company called Pride Healthcare, which Dan helped build into an industry leader in the power mobility field. The name of the company was changed to Pride Mobility Products and created 700 jobs. It was named one of the state's best places to work. In 2011, Governor Tom Corbett nominated Dan to serve as Pennsylvania's Secretary of Revenue. While there, Dan significantly reformed the department to increase efficiencies. Dan's leadership was recognized by the Council on State Taxation for having the most dramatic improvement of any Department of Revenue in the country. Dan was reelected to the United States Congress in 2020 to a second term by a large margin. In Congress, Dan serves on two very important committees, that being the Committee for Small Business as well as the one for Foreign Affairs. Very importantly, especially for this week's show, Dan serves on the Border Security Caucus. We will be discussing today the crisis at the border, which is threatening to engulf the Biden administration in controversy and recrimination, even from his own party.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Dan, welcome back to the Volpe Report.
Great to be with you.
It seems like when you're in studio, and honestly a lot of my shows nowadays are almost historical in nature. To refresh your recollection and our viewers, we had you here right in the wake of, if you would, the insurrection on January 6th at the Capitol. And talking about, your take of it, because obviously you were there. Talking about the double standard and hypocrisy of the Democrats who basically said anybody that voted to decertify was somehow a seditionist, which I think we rebuked pretty strongly on this show. We pointed out in this show, we both did, that Nancy Pelosi and her fellow Democrats, up to 31 different House Democrats, had voted to decertify several Republican elections for election irregularities.
And 80 walked out on the vote, by the way. But
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's additional information we didn't have last time. So that was historic, obviously. Now we, believe it or not, 2 months later, we have a historic piece of legislation, a $1.9 trillion COVID stimulus package, obviously, has been signed into law. And a lot of people and pundits and media have likened it and put it on a scale with FDR's New Deal all the way back to the 30s. Historic. Of course, when we talked about you coming on this show to discuss that was the major news story. And if anybody told me in about 1 week's time that issue would be relegated to the back pages, and the front pages and all the major news coverage would be on our crisis at the border, I wouldn't have thought it possible in record time that would happen. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, who should be basking in the glory of a historic piece of legislation, had scheduled a barnstorming tour of America to kind of promote his stimulus package, has canceled it. He's closed the border, which is unthinkable based on his rhetoric and the Democrats' rhetoric for months. And we have a full-fledged crisis. And when I get your comment on that, I'd like to point out and remind our viewers that, which makes, I think, your presence here even more important today, you did a congressional tour of the border. You've been there. You've seen the conditions, so you have firsthand knowledge, not like we do see on like we see on TV, or a lot of congressional people see these things in videos or on TV. You were there, so take it.
Well, it is a crisis. They won't call it that. As a matter of fact, it's more of a disaster for thousands and thousands of those who are attempting to get into our country illegally, primarily because they're being informed that they're welcome to enter our country illegally.
Sure they were.
You know, there's just no question that a few months ago, we had the best situation in 30 years at our border, if not more. We had a minimal number of illegals coming across. We had asylum being taken place in Mexico. We had laws and rules being followed in cooperation with the Mexican government and Guatemala and other Central American countries, that the first safe nation, if people were leaving their nation for hostility and because they didn't feel safe, that's where asylum would take place. We ended catch and release. We had order at the border. And then Joe Biden comes in and thinks it's a wonderful idea to issue these executive orders to create disorder at the border by executive order. Sorry for that.
I actually kind of thought it was kind of a good pun.
So he removed, for the purpose of reversing everything that President Trump did, whether good or bad, they've created a terrible, terrible, terrible situation at the border. And you're right, I was there. And at the time, we had a highly excessive number of illegals coming across. It was in the neighborhood of 100,000. Today, this was about 2.5 years ago. Today, we're well above that, and in March, so in June and July, it's predicted to be double, but because he's allowing asylum here, because he's allowing unaccompanied, he meaning Joe Biden and his administration, and the idea that, you know, now we put Kamala Harris in charge of it, the vice president, who really, if you listen to anything that she ever says, she blames the Customs and Border Patrol. Customs and Border Patrol, every single one of them, tell Republicans and Democrats the same thing. Because we get reports, I'm also on the Border Security Caucus in Congress with Republicans and Democrats, and we get informed from the CBP what's going on. And the cartels, folks, run this situation. They run the number of people coming across. They use women and children and men as mules.
Right.
Carry drugs across, pay them as much as they possibly can, and by the way, these poor people suffer all kinds of abuses on the way that I'm not going to even describe how horrible.
Rape is
they are
common,
here.
correct?
Up to as more than 1/3.
Wow.
Of children, of women. So this is a disaster, and it was created only by sending out messages that we don't have any border security, that illegals will gain entry, we will release you, asylum you can seek in the United States, and along with that, along the way, let's face it, remember when Joe Biden was campaigning, they asked who is agreeable to illegals getting health care, okay? Not only did Kamala, the vice president, and Joe both put up their hands, I think they put up two hands. Right. They put up a leg. Okay. I mean, they were just all in on such things. And to add to this crisis, this disaster, last week, the U.S. House under Nancy Pelosi passed H.R. 6, which was amnesty. Amnesty. Oh. So in order, if there's any more of an incentive to say to those poor people who are seeking a better life, but we have to do things in an orderly manner, of course, and not create
and protect our own citizens from infectious disease that could be coming across the border. We've shut our country down, but let people apparently, like with COVID, come in.
There's no testing taking place. They're being released without testing, by the way.
Of course.
Without checking criminal records or without testing.
And then you hit on a bunch of good points, Congressman. Let's talk about one thing. In the Trump administration, while they were getting processed for legal entry, something you don't hear much anymore, but the term is illegal as opposed to illegal aliens or illegal immigrants, legal aliens, meaning they're processed and go through the process to enter the country, at least legally, for whatever purposes that are legal purposes. Well, while that processing was taking place in the Trump administration, they were kept in Mexico, and then had to report, of course, for the various procedural responsibilities before they could be let in. In this administration, They're being released into America, they're in Texas, they're in Mississippi, and in other places. And while they're waiting, and of course it's a standard thing that, and then don't show up at the hearings or the procedural and processing things they must report to. Once they're in, they disperse and they're just in. Yeah. And now they're talking about granting, like you said, asylum, but granting a path to citizenship to folks who are here illegally and didn't even go through our processes to be registered. So,
and once again, the Democrats completely overreach. And it's hard to even say Democrats, okay? The left wing of the party that leads, unfortunately, all the rest, because there are many Democrats that don't agree with this policy, but sadly, they're voting along with it just the same. We're offering in the stimulus bill that you're talking about, illegals will receive, indirectly, if they're a spouse of a legal, the $1,400 stimulus checks. Okay, the American people need to know that. We've spent, the Biden administration has spent almost $100 million on hotel rooms for illegals thus far. And you do the math on the number of people.
We have homeless veterans in this country.
It's over $500 a night being spent. You do the simple math on it. So there's a tremendous amount of disorder. It's just simply not right. And the other thing is this. Look, I'm for illegal immigration reform. Right. I'd love to see it. In fact, there was another bill just this past week. Yeah, for farmers, for H-2A, extended visas for those who work on farms. Right. But once again, the Democrats had the poison pill in it. I was agreeable to 80% of that bill, but they included things that said that you only needed to work on a farm a minimal number of hours, then you had a right to citizenship and an extended green card. Like and DACA. Come on, I'm okay with the idea of DACA.
Right.
President
That's
Trump
the Dreamers bill.
The Dreamers bill. Sorry. Yeah. We could have passed that, but we got to have border security first. If we're going to do these things, we must have high fences but wide gates. Right. But they don't want that. They want the issue, and clearly, chaos seems to work for them, which is what's been created.
Yeah, and you mentioned, it's a natural segue, you mentioned Democrats are now turning in larger numbers in shocking numbers to me, in criticism of the Biden administration for their border policy. So a couple of, as I want to do on this show, I'll read some of the headlines. Here's one, an Associated Press story. The headline being, White House has been secretive on border issues. And I'll just read the highlights of it.
Gag orders? Yeah, I'd say that's secretive.
And again, came in, everything's going to be open. Everything about this administration will be transparent.
It's unbelievable.
Apparently not. Let me read this, an Associated Press article, Washington, D.C. President Joe Biden's administration has tried for weeks to keep the public from seeing images like those that emerged Monday, showing immigrant children in United States custody at the border sleeping on mats, under foil blankets, separated in groups by plastic partitions. Administration officials have steadfastly refused to call the detention of more than 15,000 children in U.S. custody or the conditions they're living under a crisis. To your point, it is a crisis, although they're saying it's not. They have stymied most of the efforts of outsiders to decide for themselves. Biden officials barred nonprofit lawyers who conduct oversight from entering a Border Patrol tent where thousands of children and teenagers are detained. They have refused or ignored requests from the media for access. Such access was granted several times by the administration of President Donald Trump. The new president faces growing criticism for his apparent secrecy from his fellow Democrats, to your point. Let me give you just a couple of them. Axios, on Monday, first published a series of photos taken inside the largest Border Patrol detention center, a sprawling tent facility in the South Texas city of Donna. The photos were released by Democratic Representative.
There, by the way. I was in Donna.
Oh, we'll talk about that in a second. Democratic Representative Harry Cuellar, if I'm saying it correctly, a Texas Democrat from Laredo. Cuellar said he released the photos in part because the administration has refused media access to the Donna tent. So if you can tell us what you saw in Donna.
Well, there was order. It was very crowded. The children were in, and families were in air-conditioned areas. And there was
This was in the Trump administration. when you were there.
Right. There was plenty of snacks and food, and they were getting 3 squares a day. But presently, it's been overrun. So crowded and overrun are two different situations. I mean, you even look at the data that the Biden administration is putting out, which I can't help but have doubts about, and I'll explain why. They've got unaccompanied minors. There's like 20 times as many right now, maybe 25 times, as the worst times during the Trump administration. And if you remember, they were being blamed for all kinds of horrific things, for separating families and all. It's 25 times worse right now. And the idea, how do the American people like the idea that the only footage coming out is what the Biden administration is taking and providing? Come on, where is that from? George Orwell?
Yeah.
I mean,
yes,
and
actually.
And then you got Henry Cuellar, who's a Democrat, nice guy, representative, a member of Congress in Texas. He takes his own film footage. He basically has to bootleg it in order to show people what's going on. And some of it was terrible. Some of it looked familiar as to what I saw before, because it's a very, very difficult situation.
So let me, I also have here from the New York Times, a fairly progressive, liberal newspaper. Their headline, Democrats' Confusion on Immigration Policy. And I'd like, again, just to read a couple of the quotes. In recent years, a growing number of immigration advocates and progressive Democrats have been dissatisfied with the status quo of immigration, even what Bill Clinton and Barack Obama as presidents had supported. President Biden instead emphasizes the humane treatment of immigrants regardless of their legal status. And obviously, we've talked about he's clearly signaled for them to come. Mr. Biden's policy incentivizes droves of people to come, and the only way to slow it down is by changing policy at our doorstep, said Democratic Representative Vincent Gonzalez, another Democrat of South Texas. He told that to the Washington Post. And back to Representative Cuellar, another House Democrat from Texas, said the administration was sending a terrible message. Well, when you say if you want free health care, come on up. If you want stimulus checks, come on up. If you want an easy path to citizenship, come on up. What did they think was going to happen, Dan?
And you know what else? I mean, you hate to think that there's some sort of master plan here, right? We're dealing with people, for crying out loud, right? And not just the people from Mexico and the people from Central America, but these cities in southern Arizona, in southern Texas, being overrun. Right. I mean, the mayors, they're literally dropping them off with busloads and being told to, make your way. And then on top of that, right, they passed this H.R. 1, which, along with all kinds of other federalization and eliminating the ability for certain states, 27, by the way, that require ID to vote, that would be prohibited, that would be banned by the geniuses out of Washington. It also requires automatic registration. So if somebody gets a driver's license, they can register to vote. Somebody gets a tax ID number. They don't need the Social Security. A tax ID number. They will be automatically registered to vote. So clearly, this will add to the voter rolls as well. Right. Okay, so there's a lot to this that doesn't look very good. As I say sometimes, it's like an onion. The more you peel it back, the more you want to cry. Yeah.
And on that note, we'll take our first break. Again, we're here today with United States Congressman Dan Meuser from the 9th Congressional District, a regular guest in this show. You heard about his specific committee assignments and caucus assignments and credentials. He has been to the border on a congressional tour. He has seen firsthand what's there. And what we have right there now, folks, is a complete and total dumpster fire. It's a flat out a disgrace. And we'll get back in the second part of the show to some of the other messaging that's at stake here. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Every week, Chuck Volpe shares his perspective on Pennsylvania issues in the news and on your mind. From new laws being introduced in Harrisburg and Washington, to government spending and even local controversies, hear how they affect us in Northeast and Central Pennsylvania. Catch Volpe's views every Tuesday on the Fox 56 News, first at 10.
Welcome back. We're here today again with United States Congressman Dan Meuser from the 9th Congressional District. And Dan, we were kind of talking before the taping and off camera during the break. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, and I'll give you mine first to kind of give some context. This now we can, I think, agree, and most of America agrees at this point, that the signaling that went on by the far left, the socialist Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, one of their top wish list items was this charitable view of immigration without dealing with the realities of it. It was clearly signaled by the president-elect when he was the president-elect, and the response has been a disaster at our border. So that begs the question for me. The old lawyer in me kind of pops out and extrapolating. What else are we going to have on the leftist wish list? I call it socialism, flat out. What else are we going to have to go through in this country and find out that it's a terrible mistake? Do we really have to destroy tens of millions of jobs to understand that there needs to be a balance between being responsible for our climate, cutting down our carbon emissions without wiping out tens of millions of jobs and hundreds of billions of economic impact that our country could not withstand? Like, how many terrible mistakes have to be made before? Can't we do something before we destroy our country?
Yeah, it's very concerning, this idea of federalization and the idea that somehow Washington knows best. And some of the things taking place, like we mentioned before and sort of left, a gag order that they won't even let CBP agents speak nor allow any video out. And then you go to the other extreme of, they're banning Dr. Seuss books, right? And then, we talk about some of the things that are being done with the stimulus, the so-called rescue plan, and the dollars being mandated and how they're being distributed to states. Some states are getting an excessive amount of money, but with all kinds of strings attached to them. Like, for instance, Pennsylvania for the next several years won't be able to lower any of its taxes in order to try to compete with the Texases and Florida and everything else. So what are they trying to do? Even out all the states so one state can't have a better advantage, even if it's more effectively run than another? Are they trying to maintain that level of overall control? And just the whole nanny state concept of the more you give, the more loyalty you'll have to that particular party, and then take it even further with the executive orders that have taken place. And then let's bring, by the Biden administration, then let's bring it down to the Tom Wolf administration. Having this national state emergency in place for all this time, picking and choosing who can stay open, who can't, making countless errors along the way, of course.
Which they've admitted to.
Yeah. How in the world could you possibly do that? And then telling us you're following the science and you're sending back, and perhaps it was an idea at the beginning, but immediately it should have been known that no, we're not sending the most sick, most vulnerable older people back to nursing homes because we're afraid our hospitals are going to get overrun, because Andrew Cuomo was doing that.
And so may be impeached for it.
So it must be a good idea. Why we don't understand these mistakes and these actions, this is a serious game, okay? We're elected. Okay, we do things that must be in the best interest of the vast majority of people for the long term, not what is politically expedient or fits with what a special interest is demanding. And there's a lot of that taking place. This Reggie we talk about, it
was a big part of our last week's show.
Green Gas Initiative, Regional Green Gas Initiative. That's a terrible, terrible initiative for Pennsylvania, but it must fit with what the environmentalist demands are, and frankly, in them, the hell with what's best for the overall economy and average family in Pennsylvania. Okay. That's overreaching government and then some.
Yeah, a great point. And let's go further down the rabbit hole, Dan, if you will. Another raging issue right now in this country. And let me be clear about something. I firmly and strongly support transgender rights, transgender equality under the law, their fair treatment. That's what makes America America. They're entitled to equal
100%
protection.
agreed.
And most responsible people do. But here's what I don't agree with. What I don't agree with is, as one of my favorite political commentators, Ben Shapiro, says, facts don't care about your feelings and your agenda. And that is that the fact is that the issue right now is, at what point are we going to allow transgenders by choice to participate in interscholastic or in intercollegiate athletics? And the point being is, back to facts, it's a biological fact that men have certain abilities because of testosterone and other things, that they are generally bigger, stronger, and faster than women. Which means if you let a male who, through gender dysphoria and whatever orientation, which I have respect under the law, they should be treated equally and fairly. But however, to say, therefore, I am choosing to be a woman, and therefore I get to participate in women's athletics, what does that do to our girls and our young women that want to compete fairly? Because you know what also equal protection does, Dan, under the Equal Protection Clause? It allows those women and girls to compete in a fair and level playing field. And it gets into the bathroom issue, for example. In a children in a school setting, will they be allowed then to decide that they could use the ladies' room or the girls' restroom? There are issues that have to be, sometimes reality is inconvenient and facts are inconvenient, but these are issues that have to be addressed without in any way suggesting that they're not entitled to equal protection under the law. So we have to factually modulate our systems to accommodate. So maybe we need a third bathroom, a ladies' room, a men's room, and whoever, unisex we'll call it.
And many schools do that because they accommodate. They want to keep, even if it's one person, which is fine, to make that individual comfortable. But to have a federal mandate or a state, or in this case, a federal mandate stating that not only is equality required in society and in the workplace, but also in the locker room and in religious institutions that operate in a certain manner according to their religion. So again, it's just a wild overreach that is unnecessary. Right. And when they include it in what would otherwise be reasonable bills, that's where the left is going. They're pushing the envelope, if you will, just constantly trying to push things to the extreme.
Right. And back to the point we both made, Dan, is that do we need to see this disastrous policy play itself out before, wait a minute, we have a crisis now. Mm-hmm. How about a little foresight from our elected officials? And clearly you're one of them, and you've had that foresight.
And how about freedom, right? How about we work on freedom as well for states? I mean, look at Florida, for instance, versus Pennsylvania during the course of this pandemic. Has half the number of fatalities, has largely stayed open, kept the small businesses in line with the large businesses. Where here we let the big box stores be open and we closed down Main Street, and it was just one of many mistakes that were made along the way. We have no law enforcement, meaning our Attorney General has done nothing of the lengthy list of grievances that were filed to do with closures, to do with nursing homes, to do with counties being withheld dollars from the governor's office, breaking state and federal law, not a peep out of the Attorney General's office, and then all kinds of election irregularities that forget the fraud, okay, that are just clear and present and occurred and will occur again if nothing's done about it. So it is really a matter of freedom as well. If we can work off of the Constitution, the understanding of freedom, because that in the end works, but with rules and laws that people buy into because they're reasonable and they're of the people, by the people, for the people. Those shouldn't just be old words written on a wall at the Lincoln Memorial.
Well stated, Congressman. Believe it or not, our time is up. We have to bring you back for part 2. We were again here today with United States Congressman from the 9th Congressional, Dan Meuser, a potential statewide candidate. He is considering that right now, and we would be well served to have him even in higher office, I have no doubt. But we hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll be back again next week on another important topic.